Good afternoon. For a lot of you, it's good morning. For some of you, it is even good evening. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing related challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, including data center operators like colocation and hyperscale, edge, modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as data center technology and data center facilities related companies, construction, real estate, and investment companies, as well as outsourced sales and marketing services related companies in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And this is for you, regardless of where you sit on the go-to-market on the GTM team. Maybe you work in sales, like as an account executive, or sales development rep, business development rep, like an AE or an SDR or BDR, or maybe you work as like an account manager at AM or client success, some similar kind of post-sales retention, land and expand kind of role. Perhaps you work in product or channel partnerships, or maybe you are responsible for bringing it all together, for recruiting the right people into the right roles, onto the right teams, getting the right people playing their musical instruments at the right tempo, at the right volume, getting the right people sitting in the bus, rowing the boat at the right speed, whatever analogy you want to use, or the maestro orchestra conductor. If you're serious about growing your career, your team's impact, and your company's role in around digital infrastructure, data centers, and critical facilities, you are for sure in the right place. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational resources and educational events just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our data center sales and marketing newsletter. You can do so directly on our website. So you get these notifications weekly to your email inbox on Sundays. Subscribe at www.dcsmi.com. So what's on the agenda? What's in the inbox for today? We're going to start by talking about how to build a strong colocation data center sales pipeline. Then we'll turn our attention to how modular data center providers can stand out in a niche market. After that, we'll talk about how edge data centers can differentiate in a crowded local marketplace. Following that, we'll take a real quick break from our message for a message from our sponsor. And during the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a hyperscale data center solutions operator generates genuine leads, how a data center racks and enclosures provider can use learning to improve sales and marketing. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll discuss how a data center sustainability marketer can get leadership buy-in. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge, something that you think we should address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you are watching from. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first topic, which is, how do we build a strong colocation data center sales pipeline? How do we build a strong sales pipeline for a colocation data center? That is a terrific question, and it's one that I am asked dozens, if not a few hundred times a year from colocation operators literally all over the globe. So the first thing I want you to think about is when it comes to building a pipeline for a colocation business, is how many locations are you operating within? Is this a solo colocation facility business? You just have one or two facilities that are located in the same general area? Are you more like a regional player where you have a handful of locations in your state and your province that are spread out over a little bit of driving time? Or are you more national or global? National likely means a minimum of 5 or 10, maybe significantly more than that in your country. Global would mean that you're operating across multiple national boundaries. The reason that this is important is there are two basic kinds of playbooks that can be especially helpful for lead generation and sales cycle acceleration when it comes to growing a healthy pipeline for this kind of business. The two different kind of playbooks at the most simple level are a hyper-local playbook focusing on your local marketplace, those that can easily drive to your location within 30 or 60 minutes. And then there's a long distance or a digital playbook. And they both have their place depending on your company's capabilities, your facilities, your managed services, basically where you can win and retain the ideal clients. So what we need to start from is, once we know your size footprint, whether you're just one or two locations, or whether you're national, whether you're global, or somewhere in the middle, that will dictate how many different potential variations of this that you'd want to be able to run. And when we say variations, it's not a separate go-to-market for each location, but it is likely that there will be different events that are unique to that particular location. So if your resources are fairly limited and you have multiple locations, you're going to have to prioritize, because you're not going to be able to be everywhere at all times. But if you have a relatively small amount of locations, or you have a pretty decent sized sales, account management, marketing kind of resource team in each location, what I'd encourage you to think about is, at a high level, what are you going to do to create awareness and educate and build trust in your local market? And then what are you going to do to largely take that same kind of playbook and run it long distance, run it digitally, run it virtually? So at a high level, what we really need to figure out is who your ideal clients are for your co-location facility or facilities. What do we know about them? When we dig into your reviews, your testimonials, your logos, your case studies, when you pull up your CRM and you look at who your happiest clients are, who your most profitable long-term clients are, what do those folks have in common? Where are they located geographically? How big or how small are their companies in terms of employee headcount? Not in terms of how much space they're taking up in your racks and cabinets, or how much power they need, but how big or how small are their companies at an account level? The reason that that's especially important is when we get into prospecting and targeting, like LinkedIn is going to likely be one of your best places for a variety of parts of this. And LinkedIn standardizes on brackets. Those headcount brackets are like 1 to 10 employees, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, 200 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, and 10,000 plus. You can tell I've been through these brackets quite a few times. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, it's been one of the more stable parts of the LinkedIn platform over the last 10 years. In fact, unlike the industries, which got a update a few years ago to go from roughly 150 industry classifications to, I think, well over 400 now, the headcount brackets that are used across the board on the LinkedIn platform, regardless of whether you're looking at LinkedIn Sales Navigator or LinkedIn Campaign Manager, the ads platform uses the same size brackets. So in terms of your ideal client profile, your ICP, where are the ideal clients located? How big or small are their companies? And on the small end, the low end of the range, basically, how big do they need to be to afford your minimum co-location rental, co-location size, your minimum level of engagement? And at what point do they get so large that they may not be a good fit for your company? Maybe there is no upper limit, but it's possible, if you're a small to mid-sized company, that there could be a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 kind of opportunity that on the surface may look incredible, but the reality is they may be asking for all kinds of financial, legal, regulatory integration, a whole bunch of concessions and capabilities that only the largest of large co-location operators may be able to meet. So be self-aware on the low end of that range and the upper end of the range. And then also think about what industries, what verticals, what niches you tend to do better at than others. The reason this is especially relevant for a co-location operator is, depending geographically where you're located, there's a host of regulatory issues that can come up with certain kind of industries. It can be across the board, but it can also be industry specific depending on the market where you are located. Like, for example, have you historically done well in healthcare? Has your co-location facility been fantastic for financial services companies, manufacturing companies, education, government? Are there certain niches where you've been immediately disqualified because you didn't have this credentialing, or they would ask for something that you just don't have? So be really clear about the industry, the great industries for your co-location business, and what industries are the opposite of great that you'd want to negatively or exclude out because they're just not going to be satisfied, be a good fit for you initially or long term, at least with your company's current capabilities today. So nail that ideal client profile, figure out in those accounts who are the 1 or 2 or 3 different kinds of stakeholders that you want to create awareness in front of and educate and build trust with throughout their full journey. Now, the challenges for co-location is it can sometimes be a pretty long journey. One of the things I talk to co-location CEOs and sales directors and marketing folks about all the time is what to do about the contract length. You could have the perfect prospect, except for one minor but huge major detail. They're in month 7 of a 36-month contract. So they're legally bound to the current facility for another 29 months, which means they're probably not going to be looking for at least another 23 months, unless something really hits the fan and they need to look for the exits early. Those scenarios do come up, so there is an argument for staying in front of them. But yeah, there's timing issues that come up as well with all of this. But at a high level, we need to know, based on your current capabilities, based on the space, the power, the cooling that you have, the density, your compliance, your locations, who are the ideal clients at the company level, and who are the stakeholders within those accounts that are super important for you to build relationships with, educate and build trust with over time. Once you've figured out who the most important and second most important stakeholders are, we're going to call them your primary and secondary buyer persona. We need to understand their biggest goals that they're working on individually, that their team is working on, that their company is working on, that's at the intersection of something that's either directly or indirectly related to co-location. We also need to know on a professional level what's driving them nuts. What are their biggest stressors? What are their biggest challenges? That's at least indirectly, ideally directly related to needing digital infrastructure like co-location space. And we need to get those goals and challenges in their own words, not what you think their words are, but what their words actually are, because we're taking the time to ask these people directly. And it could be through surveys, it could be face-to-face or virtual conversations, it could be studying the CRM, but it is incredibly important to get their own words, because by finding the consensus on that, that's going to drive everything that you do with your digital, with your website, with your product marketing, with your sales enablement, email marketing, social posts, and perhaps most importantly, with your events strategy. I think the most important playbook for growing your sales pipeline for a co-location business in today's self-driven buyer's journey is events. And it's not just any events, it's a special kind of events. What do I mean by this? Well, 10 years ago, if we were talking about building sales marketing and go-to-market for a co-location business, you would have been able to count on the fact that your sales team gets to meet most of your prospects and clients when they're about halfway through their research and decision-making process. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, found that 56% of a typical journey was over before sales contact, before vendor contact. That wasn't too bad. That meant that if you did everything right, you could count on the fact that your sales team was in there for the final 44%. So you still had a lot of surface area, a lot of opportunity to diagnose, explore what they need, help them, walk them through the different options that are available, help them pick the best options and build up that strong education and trust along the way. However, that 56% point is now a nostalgic, distant memory in the rearview mirror. 10 years of digital transformation have had that number jump from 56% to 83%. Gartner found, and we see this all the time with the companies that we work with in and around co-location, 83% of a typical journey is over before you get to meet your prospects, before you get to meet your future clients. In other words, they're doing so much self-driven, self-propelled research on their own right now without you in the room that even if you do everything perfectly, your sales team is only going to be in there for the final 17% of the buyer's journey of researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing. And holy smokes, it's not a big challenge compared to what it was 10 years ago. So what do we do? How do we get you back in there so you can participate in that first 83%? Well, we need to reinvent yourself. We need to remodel how you show up in your career. So instead of being seen like a transaction-focused salesperson or vendor, you instead show up more like a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor. Some of the more seasoned veteran people on your team may even be showing up as thought leaders. How do we do this? Well, it changes the nature of who you hire. It changes how you invest in upskilling and reskilling and cross-training, workforce and learning development on your team. Because when they're able to show up looking more like peers of their prospects, your prospects actually want to spend time with them. And when you do this in the context of a educational event strategy, whether it's virtual events like a webinar series, and series is incredibly important. This isn't one and done. We need to stay with them throughout the full duration. Or you do an offline version of webinars, like in the form of breakfast seminars or lunch and learns. The idea is to take the goals and the challenges that you discovered about each one of these most important segments, and those 12 goals and challenges, once a month, you host an educational event. If they can drive to your facility, you host it in person. If they can't drive, and when you host it in person, you bundle in breakfast and a little bit of networking time and a tour following the educational part. But the educational part is incredibly important. You have to bring out your internal or external subject matter experts. They have to learn something that's so good that if they went to that same 45-minute session at a conference, there's no doubt in your mind that it would be one of the best sessions that they attended at the conference, and you get a perfect score in the mobile app on the session evaluation. They have to get that kind of, and of course, in the context of a co-location facility, immediately after that and some Q&A, you can take folks that are interested for a tour around your facility. And for people that can't get there, you're pretty much doing the same thing with your webinar series. And of course, record it for the people that can't make it live. What's incredibly important is when you understand at an account level that you really are trying to get to a decision committee, multiple decision makers. This education over an extended period of time can be a really, really important part of getting to multiple stakeholders within that company. In other words, hey, Bob, it's great to see that you registered for cybersecurity best practices for mid-market manufacturing IT professionals. But we know when it comes to this area, it truly takes a village. There's typically people involved from help desk, network infrastructure, operations, cybersecurity, compliance, finance, whatever. So given that, who else should attend? Who else should join us for this? Simply hit the forward button on your email, add a thought or two on why this matters. And we know that teams that learn together grow together. When this works, you'll see multiple people registering and most of them attending these events. And the really cool part is you're starting to drive alignment across the team, across people from perhaps multiple teams from that company, which is a really important part of ultimately what your account executive is going to need to do anyway. So if you can start doing that in the formative stages of the buyer's journey and the awareness and the consideration stage of the journey, when you're in a position to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options in front of them, it can be a game changer. And you'll know it's working because when you host event number 2 and event number 3 in that same series, you start to notice more people from that same company coming along next time. And it gets to the point where like you're three or four events into this. And by the third event, there's 5 people from the same company. And one of them pulls you aside and says, hey, we're 5 people out of the 20 people in the room here. And we love this. Any chance we can get you to come in next month and present this on site in front of our entire IT organization, all 35 people in the room, host a lunch and learn, and you can, and we're like, wow. That's awesome. So what you're doing is you're completely changing the context, getting out of the vendor box, staying out of the vendor box. This nearly guarantees that you stay on the short list, and in many cases starts to proactively knock your competitors off of the short list because they can't hold a candle to the tremendous amount of professional development and learning development that you're doing with multiple stakeholders for your team. And it's a phenomenal way to grow your sales pipeline because they don't see you as someone that's trying to close them anymore on a co-location lease, on a co-location contract. They see you as an expert, and that completely changes how they start to share trusted information with you. It completely changes about them giving you the real scoop on what's really, really going on and get you to the point where by the time they're ready for a sales conversation, they're quoting your experts and your methodology that they've used as the framework for how they've evaluated all of the different options that are in front of them for co-location. So at a high level, this is how I would build a strong co-location data center sales pipeline. Okay, what do we got up next? Let's take a look at our next question. Okay, how does a modular data center provider stand out in a niche market? How can a modular data center provider stand out in a niche market? That's a terrific question. And in order for us to be effective at addressing it, we have to actually know what that niche market is. If you are just starting a modular data center business and you do not have an established client base, the goal with go-to-market is we're going to run some experiments and we're going to try to figure out with your current value proposition, what's unique about your modular data center approach, who are the most likely buyers, and we're going to reverse engineer how we get in front of those most likely buyers and the specific people within those companies as early as possible in their journey along the way. That is a leading indicator that they're going to be a buyer of a modular data center in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months. And the more we're able to reach them as early as possible in that journey, the more likely it is that we can stack the decks in our favor with the prospects, with the future clients seeing us as the be-all end-all expert when it comes to anything and everything having to do with modular data centers. The later we meet a prospect, the more likely it is that a competitor of yours, a direct competitor, or an indirect competitor, or even a non-business model competitor, someone creating content and educational resources on the same topics that your prospect cares about, if you don't get found early, someone else is shaping the criteria and stacking the decks in their favor. So it's incredibly important that we not only understand at a company level who these ideal clients are, in other words, where they're located. We know the location is going to actually be a really big factor for a modular data center provider, because unless you have manufacturing capabilities worldwide or have the ability to cost effectively ship your modular data centers worldwide, where you have manufacturing and where you have installation, where you have service capabilities, where you have channel partners, whoever is doing this is directly aligned with what your addressable market, what your ideal client profile is for ideal client locations. Second, when it comes to company size, be self-aware about what you do well and what some of the limitations are. And does your offering play especially well in a smaller, lower cost, more price sensitive part of the market? Or does it play exceptionally well in the enterprise part of the market where they're very demanding with the feature set and the support, but they have enterprise kinds of budgets? Or is it somewhere in the middle? And again, these are product manager strategy kind of conversations that need to be decided at the same time that you're thinking about your go-to-market. But that'll tell you size-wise who you should be talking to. What's the floor on what's the smallest they can be and actually afford your entry-level options? And at what size are they so big that they may outgrow you because they have such unique demanding requirements that you may not be able to deliver on today? So maybe you end up with a range where these are companies that have, say, anywhere from 50 employees to 5,000 employees or something like that, which would still give you a pretty healthy addressable market in most of the geographic regions around the world where there'd be significant demand for modular data centers. And then are there certain industries or niches or verticals that are better fit than others? To stand out in the niche market, the goal usually is to specialize your go-to-market into the niches where you think you can win most. Let's say you're trying to get very strong market share in healthcare and financial services. So you identify that in your ideal client profile, and you figure out who the two different kinds of stakeholders are in these companies that are most interested in talking to you about modular data centers in these healthcare companies and financial services companies. Or maybe it's healthcare and data center operators like co-location data center providers or something like that. So you figure out who are the two most important kinds of stakeholders that show up on the decision committee. And we need to reverse engineer understanding what's going on in their worlds, person by person basis. So let's say we're starting with the healthcare primary buyer persona. What's that person's biggest goals that they're working on professionally? These often show up in a job description or in their objectives and key results, their OKRs. What's their team working on? And what's going on at a company level that directly impacts how they're going to make their researching, comparing, and evaluating pricing of different options, different modular data center options. So that's on the goals side. Then we want to repeat the same thing on the stressors, on the challenges side. What are they struggling with the most? That's a leading indicator that they're going to be in market in the near future for modular data center, or a modular data center, or modular data centers plural. That's your primary. And then we're going to repeat the same exercise for your secondary persona. And we're likely going to want to do that for your other segment as well. In other words, let's say, for example, that you think you're selling to a CTO and a director of network infrastructure, or a director of development and a CTO, or something like that. If you think it's these same exact kinds of stakeholders, there's an excellent chance that the healthcare version of that persona cares about different issues than the co-location version of that persona. So the more precise you are, the more hyper specific you are about understanding who they are and what they care about, and the more you can address that, that is one phenomenal way for you to stand out in niche markets, is to specialize your go-to-market, to specialize all of your lead generation, sales cycle acceleration, certainly having unique pages on your website for each of these segments, and perhaps a unique page for each of the most important stakeholders in each of these segments, having lead generation premium content, having events separately for each of these segments, having separate real estate on your homepage, each potentially having their own events series, like events series on modular data center issues for healthcare IT professionals, and modular data center issues for co-location IT professionals. And that's just a working title. You can do so much better once you understand their actual goals and challenges, but you get the idea. Segmenting the website, segmenting the drop-down lists set on the forms, segmenting the website navigation, filtering and segmenting in your CRM. And there's an excellent chance that you may even want to specialize the roles on your GTM team. We see this happening with increasing frequency throughout the data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem, where in this particular case, let's say your modular data center company is targeting healthcare and targeting co-location operators, you would hire a different team, or at least a different account executive, different sales development rep that is focused on growing pipeline in healthcare accounts, and a separate team or a separate account executive that's just focused on co-location data center operators. And that alone can make an enormous difference with standing out from the crowd, because your client-facing team members are deeply embedded in that niche, in that ecosystem, in that industry. What do we mean by deeply embedded? Well, it's way more than just doing good buyer persona research. It's understanding where those buyer personas hang out online and offline, what events they go to, going to those same events, what podcasts, what YouTubers, what newsletters, what bloggers, and then figuring out a way to get in front of them in that way. And then on top of that, using those same goals and challenges to host your own events and to publish and promote your own media. Again, that's all about educating and building trust about the biggest goals and challenges that are top of mind for each of those segments that directly or indirectly intersect with the early and middle stages, and eventually the late stages of a buyer's journey for a modular data center. So that's what I would recommend doing for modular data centers. There's also another issue that comes up as well with modular data centers, is because of the nature of what you do is so unique. And I'm willing to bet that if I talk to the CEOs or CTOs or heads of product for different modular data center manufacturers, they would tell us about what makes their modules unique relative to others in the marketplace. And sure, you can demonstrate that with embedded videos on your website. And sure, you can do virtual tours for prospects that are not geographically located to your factory or where you have these modules deployed. But there's also a lot to be said that if you can run a hyper-local playbook to get people to attend events in your facility, and as part of that, you're walking them through the factory, walking them through the different modular data centers and pointing out what's unique about what you have, well, yeah, that plays completely differently. So there's hyper-local, there's long distance, but at the end of the day, the most impactful thing you can do is segmenting and personalizing the website, the email marketing, the social media, the events, so that they see that your client-facing team members have deep expertise on what's going on in their world and how that specifically relates to their goals and challenges aligned with needing modular data center capacity in one way, shape, or form or another. So what do we got next? What is our next question? How do edge data center providers differentiate in a crowded local market? How do edge data center providers differentiate in a crowded local market? That is a fantastic question. So edge data centers typically means that it's a hyper-specific, it's a location that has a lot of hyper-specific value to a certain kind of client because of its very, very precise location. And these typically are a big hit for latency reasons, but they can also be a big hit for governance reasons. Now, latency reasons, that means that you're in very close proximity to where the end client has a IT or telecommunications related need. And by very close, this isn't like, okay, well, this global data center operator has 6 facilities in Northern Virginia or San Francisco or London or Madrid or Melbourne or whatever, or Singapore. And it can be any one of those 6 locations. We don't care which one. No, in this particular case, they care about exactly which one because they have an office building or they have IoT infrastructure, smart city infrastructure, EV infrastructure that has some kind of need that's located 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet or something like that away from your edge data center. So they're exceptionally sensitive to that particular location. And because of that, you have unique value to people that have that extremely hyper-specific need. So with that in mind, you're going to almost certainly want to run predominantly a hyper-local playbook on the people with latency sensitive needs and a long distance, a digital, a virtual playbook on people that have governance related needs where, let's say, for example, it's incredibly important that they have edge locations in a few specific countries in the European Union or in a few specific states in the United States or in Singapore or in Japan or New Zealand or Australia, whatever it is. So 2 different playbooks. Where we need to know, however, is where you're facing the biggest crowds, where you're struggling the most for differentiation. And it's usually on the latency specific use case of the data center because the governance usually has a lot more, the governance use case usually has a lot more flexibility. It's the latency sensitive application where the clients tend to be hyper local. So when it comes to that, we need to understand like who that ideal client is, how big or small their companies are. They're hyper local to your region. So if you're doing things like looking around in LinkedIn Sales Navigator or Campaign Manager, more than likely it's a metropolitan area. It could be a rural area in the middle of nowhere, but more than likely it's a metropolitan area. And we're looking for companies of a certain size and perhaps within certain industries. And the way you could potentially stand out is attacking this by industry specialization, like edge solutions specifically customized to the demanding needs of healthcare or manufacturing or financial services or government or something like that. And by customizing your product marketing and reverse engineering that into your sales enablement and reverse engineering that into your lead generation, premium content offers, and reverse engineering that into your website content, you start to have a pretty game-changing impact on them seeing, wow, like, there's other edge options, but there's only 2 that are talking about their deep expertise in our industry and that have a slew of case studies and these phenomenal webinar panels and these phenomenal guides that are specifically tailored just to our kind of financial services company or just to our kind of health tech or healthcare related company. So that alone can be an enormous game changer for differentiating in a crowded marketplace. So again, with edge, remember 2 basic use cases. There's the governance use case. That's usually going to be marketed and sold long distance, but it doesn't have to be. And then there's the latency use case that's extremely dense, extremely distance sensitive, where it's not enough to just be present in that region. They're looking at a specific location, a specific block, because they're looking at proximity within feet or meters of your particular location. So the playbook with most things related to data center facilities and operators is if you have the ability to host educational events in a classroom or in a conference room in your edge facility, that's phenomenal. If your edge facility by location tends to be on the small side, then yeah, you're going to want to look for some place where you can cost effectively host events on a regular educational events on a regular basis, where you can invite the perfect people, the primary and the secondary buyer persona from your target accounts in those specific segments to breakfast seminars, lunch and learn, symposias, some kind of place where they can come and learn together along with your subject matter experts about the topics that are most important to them, that are vocalized and expressed and promoted, marketed in their own words, like the top 5 goals, top 10 goals that you learn about in their own words, or the top 5 or 10 challenges that you learn about in their own words. Each one of those, priority order, depending on order of frequency, is an event title. It's a working title essentially for your event, for your in-person event. And of course, you could repurpose this into webinars for people that can't make it live. You could record these and make these available on demand, chop them up in pieces for the person that'll watch a 3-minute segment, but not the whole 45-minute video. You know, all the normal content marketing, event marketing kind of playbook. But at the end of the day, the more face time you can get in an educational, trusted advisor, subject matter expert kind of context for edge data centers for this particular buyer and this particular kind of company, has a game-changing impact on their desire to want to spend more time with your client-facing team members. And the more time they spend learning from your experts, the more likely it is that you start to very quickly knock out competitive options, because the know, like, and trust with your team members is off the charts relative to others in the marketplace. So that's my quick back of the napkin high-level approach, go-to-market approach for how an edge data center can differentiate in a crowded local marketplace. So that brings us to the halfway point on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll tackle 3 more big go-to-market challenges.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. And if you're getting good value so far from this week's show, help us spread the word, share the love, hit the like button wherever you're watching, and let your connections, your coworkers, your peers know about this resource. And if you have an idea for a topic, a question, or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, please be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching it, that as well. And if we think it aligns well with our audience, we'll get that in the consideration queue to address in an upcoming show. So what do we have up next? Our next question, our next challenge, our next topic is, how does a hyperscale data center solutions operator generate genuine leads? How does a hyperscale data center solutions operator generate genuine leads? So highly qualified leads that are a perfect fit for who their sales team wants to be engaging with. So let's break this down piece by piece. So a hyperscale data center operator, by definition, is typically selling massive deals. And by massive, if you think about, co-location can be a range. And depending on where you're located, we'll use US dollars as the example, but of course you can adjust for your local currency. You may have co-location deals that are anywhere from a few $100s a month to several thousand up into the 5-figure plus range, or perhaps even beyond that. However, at the entry level point, at the lower end part of the market, some of that co-location can be a very crowded space. It can be a struggle to be differentiated. You're largely selling commoditized space at that point that butts up against the price point of high-end like hosting, like web hosting, cloud hosting. So at that level, what we're increasingly seeing is co-location operators taking inside sales teams off of those and making the sign up for those completely self-service, the onboarding, the provisioning for those completely self-service, because it's just not cost effective to put human talent on that anymore. Hyperscale is the end. Usually when it comes to co-location, if we're building out a go-to-market for a typical operator, when we define your ideal client profile, when we build out your target account list, usually there's anywhere from a couple hundred to a few thousand potential clients for each one of your facilities, depending on where you're located. If you're located in a big metro area, it may be significantly more than that. But for an average co-location operator, usually it's a few hundred or a few thousand potential clients. Hyperscale is very, very different. They're huge deals. They're usually 7-figure and 8-figure deals financially. You're usually selling them to hyperscalers. These are companies like Microsoft, Azure, Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Rackspace, Oracle Cloud, Alibaba, Meta. They're huge companies. And by definition, that means they're huge deals. And there's much fewer. So when you're defining your ideal client profile, when you're building out your target account list, it's not a couple hundred or a few thousand potential clients, it's a few dozen. And because it's a few dozen and they're much larger deals, you can afford to do things with go-to-market sales and marketing that are not practical, that are not cost-effective for co-location, that are completely practical, that are completely warranted and justified for hyperscale clients, for generating qualified leads in your target accounts for potential hyperscale clients. What kinds of activities, what kinds of investments should you be making in growth with all of that in mind? So we're at the stage now where when you're selling to highly technical, highly cynical, hyper skeptical IT professionals, people in and around those ecosystem, is they really don't want to spend a lot of time with your sales team anymore till they are just about ready to buy. The self-driven buyer's journey is a really, really big factor to take into account, because 10 years ago, someone buying hyperscale would get about halfway through their research and decision-making process, and they'd be ready to talk with an account executive. They'd be ready to talk with someone from your team. However, those days are now gone. It's not halfway through the journey anymore. It's the journey is almost over. They're typically 83% of the way through their journey before they're ready for any kind of contact, vendor contact, sales kind of contact. So that means that even if you do everything perfectly, you're only in there for the final 17% of their research and decision-making process. And that presents an enormous, enormous challenge, an enormous competitive liability. So we have to figure out a way to get you in there early and often with the right people, the right prioritized decision committee members on these potential hyperscale accounts at the right time, when it's still early enough for you to make a dent into how they evaluate your category and the competitive options that are in front of them, in the right places, in the channels that position you as an expert and not just a vendor, and at the right time. So the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that their decision committee members see your client-facing team members as the go-to experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with hyperscale data centers. That's incredibly important, because when you set up that positioning, when you set up that kind of environment, it becomes very possible and a really, really good idea to figure out a way to increase your surface area that you have with members of that decision committee in the context of professional development and learning and development. And the way you typically do this is study the heck out of what they care about. So once you've narrowed down that list of accounts and you figured out in those accounts, is it a VP of development? Is it a VP of infrastructure? Is it a CFO? Is it a CEO? Is it a board member? Your results are going to vary tremendously depending on the size of the hyperscalers that you're going after. And just as importantly, your company size, how strategic their buy is with you. In other words, how large the potential deal is. Because the bigger the deal, the more likely it is that it's going to go all the way up to the C-level and perhaps the CEO level and board level. The smaller the deal is, the more likely it is that it's not going to get anywhere near that. So as you map your accounts and figure out who you need to be building these relationships with, their size, how much they're buying from you, your size are all factors with the job roles and the nature of those responsibilities. So it's not like I can say there's one single playbook that you can use across the Americas, across EMEA, across APAC when it comes to hyperscale. No, it's going to vary quite a bit depending on their size, your company's size, and how big of a commitment they're potentially making with your company depends on how high up in the org chart that potentially floats up. And the nature of who you're interacting with, we need to know not just what their biggest questions are and concerns about hyperscale. We need to know what's going on in their professional world that's a leading indicator that they're going to be looking for hyperscale in the coming weeks and the coming months. Because as counterintuitive as this sounds, it's not a good thing to only meet people when they're just about ready to buy, especially in today's self-driven journey. Because if you only meet them for the first time when they're just about ready to buy and they haven't had any exposure whatsoever to your company, to your thought leadership resources, to your educational events, that means someone else got in there early and stacked the decks in their favor. That's not good. So it's incredibly important that we figure out a way to get in early and often. Think about 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. Your goal should be to get your client-facing team members into as many of those 28 touch points as possible. The more you're able to cover, the more you're taking oxygen away from your direct competitors, your indirect competitors, and your non-business model competitors. Because when you're providing so much professional development, learning and development value to the IT executives, to the development level executives, the finance, compliance, whoever else is involved in these kinds of decision-making roles, that they're motivated to want to spend time with your client-facing team members, it has a game-changing impact on figuring out what's really going on in that company, how they're really going to make the decision. You have a chance to impact the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options in front of them. They keep coming back. They keep bringing multiple people from their team, and you're starting to get deeply embedded into that company in a pretty profound way. So this starts with a tight approach to your ideal client profile, a tightly defined target account list, and figuring out all of the different ways, offline events, online events, podcast, educational resources, all the ways that you can impress upon the key people in these companies and their direct reports, and perhaps even their second level reports, that your team members are the go-to experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with hyperscale for their specific kind of company in this particular location for this specific kind of need. So the lead generation is typically going to come from a value exchange. And the most important thing that you can typically provide of value in the early and the middle stages of the journey is insights into how other executives in similar kinds of companies have navigated this journey. This can be downloadable content. This can be on-demand video content. This can be in-person webinars. It can be ideally in-person educational events. The educational is incredibly important. You're not going to educate and build trust by sponsoring a golf tournament or hosting a cocktail party. Those certainly have their place as well, but you don't have an opportunity to educate and build trust. You're building your brand and saying, well, they seem like nice people. That was a lot of fun. I'll go back next year, but I have no idea what that company does. It's something related to data centers. They all look the same. The problem is that's the impression they get when they're hanging out with you in a social setting. So we don't want to disproportionately spend your resources in a social setting. We want to disproportionately spend your resources in a setting that allows you to educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that your company as a hyperscale data center solutions provider can generate genuine leads from the people that are essentially trading their time and attention for the learning and development currency that you're providing to them that can help them do their jobs better, that can help their teams and can help their companies grow using best practices that you've discovered with working with other similar companies just like theirs. So yeah, your internal subject matter experts are a big part of this. You potentially may have vendors that are speaking at these events. You may have channel partners that are speaking at these events. But at the end of the day, think about creating conference grade content that's so good that if you have a couple layers of checks and balances between, hey, we should have this event, and when they ultimately attend, you would have to go through a couple of these different levels. Level number one is at a major event, way before the event, usually when the website's first going up, they put out a call for speakers, a call for papers, and you put a proposed title and a proposed abstract of what you're going to cover and a little bit of bio information on who you are and where you may have spoken in the past. For your own events, for your own educational events in person or virtually, you won't need the kind of lead time like a national or global conference where you're promoting 6-9 months out because people need to fly in for this. With a hyper local kind of playbook where people are driving 30 to 60 minutes, you're probably going to start planning this 2 to 3 months out, and you'll start promoting this 6 to 8 weeks out. and you'll start to see significant uptick in registrations as it gets a little closer. But like, so these checks and balances is having that title, the abstract, and putting in front of some representative buyers, or if you have an advisory council or something like that, to get some feedback. Does this resonate? Is this valuable? How valuable is this that you would take off a day from work to drive a half hour from your location and go attend something like this? Second conference grade content kind of thing is you want to make sure that what's in the slides, what's in the content itself, is valuable enough that it really resonates, valuable enough that if they flew across the country, flew across the globe to attend that event, and your session was one of 20 sessions that they attended or 10 sessions that they attended at the conference, that you're highly confident that your session was one of the best, or perhaps not the best, most valuable session at the entire conference. And that gets reflected in your report card, essentially the mobile app reviews about your particular session. So there's no doubt in your mind that you got phenomenal reviews. There's tons of people coming up afterwards asking for your card to set up a time to talk one-on-one. There's no doubt about it. You're going to get invited back next year. And if there was 18 people in the room at the beginning of the session, or 180 people in the room at the beginning of the session, or 87 people on the webinar at the beginning of the session, you're highly confident that just about everyone stayed to the end because they were learning so much. So these are all leading indicators that you're on the right track with conference grade content. And this is the same kind of thinking. This is the same kind of mechanism you should use, regardless of whether you're trying to win over the advisory council of a national or global conference, you're trying to win over your own advisory council, or your own metaphorical advisory council of some informal stakeholders within your company, or representative clients or channel partners that look at this and say, yeah, it looks pretty good. Slides look fantastic. The title, the copywriting looks great. Yeah, if I were the CTO of a mid-market financial services company, sign me up. So yeah, that's the kind of thinking to use. So for a hyperscale data center solutions operator that wants to generate genuine leads from the right people that are tightly clustered around your ideal client profile, around your prioritized buyer personas, this is the playbook. Show up as a teacher, show up as a consultant, show up as a subject matter expert and a trusted advisor. Make the educational experience so incredibly valuable that they keep coming back for part 2, part 3, part 4, and they love it so much that they bring their coworkers and their boss along with them so they can learn together with you. Stay on your you stay on their short list. You're knocking other people off of their short list. And the know, like, and trust, the educate and building trust is like off the charts with their team members and your team members. That's how a hyperscale data center solutions operator can generate genuine leads, highly qualified leads that are the perfect fit to be your prospects, your future clients. What do we got up next? How does a data center racks and enclosure provider use learning to improve sales and marketing? How does a data center racks and enclosure provider use learning to improve its sales and marketing? That is a fantastic question. And I think one that's not asked often enough. Because in the same way that a company that manufactures racks and enclosures can help their prospects and their clients learn from them in an academy kind of format, where you are essentially teaching and providing a light version of free consulting, educational resources for the ideal clients, for the most important primary and secondary buyer personas in these accounts, to learn about all of the issues directly related to finding the right kind of racks and enclosures and all the adjacent issues that are a leading indicator that someone's going to be in market for racks and enclosures in the near future. In addition to that lead generation and sales cycle acceleration that you can use in a learning and development and professional development environment. You can also use that in a post-purchase environment. This is like as part of onboarding, account management, client success, customer marketing, land and expand, account retention, all of that happens post-purchase. But besides the pre-purchase and the post-purchase opportunity, what people often overlook is there is a very, very rarely tapped go-to-market opportunity when you're using learning about what you do to iteratively improve, to continually improve your product roadmap. How does this work? Well, A rack and enclosure company for sure would have a product manager, perhaps a product management team, or even in the smallest of small companies, someone that wears the hat of the product manager that's responsible for spending lots of time with your ideal clients, learning about their needs, learning about the unsolved problems in the marketplace that they potentially like their rack and enclosure provider to address for them. And then that product professional, product manager, product executive comes back to your leadership team, your board, and talks with the engineers, talks with designers about how they're going to potentially address that in future versions of your racks and enclosures, or created a different product or different product line for your racks and enclosures that address these specific issues. So the customer conversations are incredibly valuable. But what a lot of people don't realize is when you set up fantastic educational content, educational resources where your prospects and clients are highly motivated to want to spend time learning from your team members, each one of those provides learning opportunities as well. In other words, the buyer persona research that a go-to-market strategist, a sales enablement expert, a marketing strategist would do to figure out, once they've prioritized who your primary and your secondary, maybe your tertiary buyer persona is, what's going on in the world? What are their biggest goals that they're trying to achieve? What are they struggling with the most, in their own words? Once you have the consensus on that alone, that can open up gaps in your product roadmap that you had no idea existed. When you ask those same kinds of folks who are buyers, who are customers, and the prospects and customers could potentially be a different way of coming at that research, like, what made you want to prioritize this initiative? What led to this? And when you did so, what did you prioritize? How did you go through and look at the different options? This is all basic buyer kind of discovery. And a lot of that is just as valuable to a product manager as it is to a content or events marketer or a sales enablement kind of person or a go-to-market strategist. So that provides learning opportunities. Looking at what your most popular campaigns are, what your most popular content, your most popular blogs, your most popular videos, your most popular emails, your most popular social posts in that particular segment can also provide a lot of cues about what's top of mind. If you do like what we do over at DCSMI, where when you fill out a lead generation form for getting access to downloadable premium content or registering for an event or a webinar or accessing that, you'll almost always see a write-in value, a write-in contact property or field on that form that says, what's your biggest sales and marketing challenge? So adopting that for this context, what's your biggest struggle? What's your biggest challenge when it comes to racks and enclosures? Or what are you most curious about when it comes to racks and enclosures? But the struggles, the challenges, the frustrations, in their own words, it's worth its weight in gold when it comes to using learning to improve your sales and marketing. Those answers, as they get attached to CRM records, your sales development reps, your account executives should be using those words all the time to understand, before they prepare for a meeting with that prospect, how they articulate their biggest rack and enclosure challenge. When you start to get multiple people from the same company converting on your landing pages, filling out forms for ebooks, reports, templates, planning guides, webinars, lunch and learns, and you have, say, 6, 7, 8 different people from a mid-sized company filling out the forms, and most of them have written in their own words what they see as their biggest rack and enclosure challenge, guess what you get to do? You can match up the words from those 6, 7, 8 different people and see, are they all saying the same thing? That's phenomenal. I know what to concentrate on. Or are they all saying completely different things with, oh, there's an alignment problem. They're not on the same page here. That's a completely different way of going at working through this particular accounts. So it gives you insights into what the person you're speaking with cares about, was top of mind in their own words. And then on a team basis, on a company-wide basis, it gives you insights there. And then you can look at the entire segment, that entire buyer persona, and see that for a data center manager, for a facilities manager, for a CTO of a small company that's wearing 20 different hats, including being the data center manager. Whatever it is, you can look at this on a segment by segment basis and see what the consensus is, the top 5 or 10 biggest goals that they have that they're trying to achieve, that are related to the digital infrastructure needs that drives a rack or enclosure purchase, and what they're frustrated with the most, what they're struggling with the most, their biggest challenges. And that consensus, again, can be a massive, massive learning opportunity. If you host in-person events, you could potentially get a lot of input from the question and answer period. You could get a lot of input from polling questions, survey questions that are asked during the event, before the event, after the event, or just surveys in general. Social monitoring, social listening to understand how your prospects, your clients talk about racks and enclosures online can also give you a tremendous amount of insight. So at a high level, that's how I would look at how data center racks and enclosure providers can use learning to improve your sales and marketing. So we've talked about basically using sales and marketing related input to improve the product roadmap, but it is pretty much the same thing when you have a well-integrated, well-aligned go-to-market team. Because when your product manager goes to visit the data centers where your racks and enclosures live, or where potential clients are, and they talk to the data center managers, when they talk to the technicians, they talk to the engineers about what they like and dislike about what they currently have, what's driving them nuts, what they wish the racks and enclosures would be able to do for them, but they can't do today. And they bring all of those learnings back. Not only is that product roadmap input, that's input for sales and marketing. Those notes, those recordings, whatever it is, are a gold mine for go-to-market strategy, or a gold mine for sales and marketing, for figuring out your content calendar, for figuring out your sales templates, for figuring out your events strategy, for figuring out the topics. So as your product manager has learnings, that should flow to the rest of the go-to-market team. And as your sales team and as your marketing team and as your account manager has learnings, again, it should go everywhere. It's this omnidirectional approach. So this is where one of the most incredibly valuable jobs of your executive sponsor, of your company leadership, is to create an environment where people trust each other enough that they openly share about what's going on in their world, the good, the bad, and the really ugly parts of it. So you get unfiltered input directly from your end clients, directly from your prospects about what they like, dislike, and really, really dislike about what you're currently doing today. And that has direct downstream ramifications for what to do in your product strategy and how to address your sales and marketing content and events strategy going forward. So that's how a data center racks and enclosure provider can use learning to improve sales and marketing. If you've been getting good value today from Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure you help us spread the word, share the love by hitting the like button. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments. And that brings us to our final question for today's show. What do we got? How does a data center sustainability marketer get leadership buy-in? How does a data center sustainability marketer get buy-in from their company's leadership? That is a fantastic question. And it's one that I talk about with both our clients and our podcast guests on a very regular basis. And what I am seeing increasingly, small numbers, but enough that it's a not missed trend, is I am starting to see the convergence of marketing roles and sustainability roles in companies where sustainability is an incredibly important part of their mission, vision, and values. I'm seeing the convergence too of marketing and product in some contexts as well, but I'm thinking especially of two data center operators in Europe where they have a chief marketing officer who is also a chief sustainability officer, right? Thinking of like T-Loop in Sweden and Deep Green in England. And I anticipate that this trend is going to continue to accelerate because companies that invest in providing world-class sustainability and amazing levels of energy efficiency and heat reuse, and that are on the leading edge and leading by example in all of these areas, they don't want it to be a secret. They want their prospects, their client, their ecosystem to know about what they're doing. So I think going forward, you're going to see a lot more of these combined roles where you see a VP of marketing and sustainability, or a VP or a chief marketing and chief sustainability officer, or perhaps even rolling in ESG, environmental, social, and governance, along with marketing. The reality is most companies in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities are severely underinvesting and underestimating the potential impact that fantastic educational resources, that fantastic educational events can have throughout their entire company, throughout their entire go-to-market. Sales, for sure, needs fantastic sales enablement materials and fantastic events that help to generate leads and accelerate leads. Your account managers, the same thing. They need great onboarding materials, great knowledge base, great explainers, great getting started webinars, great on-demand training and certification programs that help people onboard and get to initial intended and extended value and land and expand in customer marketing. Product, of course, needs that as well. There's a whole separate discipline of product marketing. Your channel team, if you have an indirect model with channel partnerships, you for sure need channel marketing to recruit potential channel partners and get them onboarded. And then you need channel enablement for your channel account managers, your channel consultants, to continue growing the relationship with your sell-through and your co-marketing with those potential channel partners. You know, it's another very underutilized area in your company that also needs great content and great events: HR. In a competitive job market, which for a lot of the roles right now in data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities, there are massive talent shortages in many of these roles that's helping to fuel explosive growth among data center recruiting firms. But if you're serious about recruiting and retaining world-class talent, letting the world know about why your company is a fantastic place to join and stay and build a career around, this is another content opportunity and another events, educational events kind of opportunity for a different kind of persona. So you start to realize pretty quickly that it's not just about sustainability, getting more educational resources and more educational events. Sales needs that. Post-sales needs that. Product needs it. Channel team needs it. HR needs it. If you're raising capital on a regular basis, finance investment officers need that kind of air cover as well. So that's where you start to realize that burying marketing under the sales organization is really not serving your company well. It might be serving your sales team kind of sort of okay, but usually only short-term interests. It's really hard to invest in things that can't be measured in the next few weeks when you're in that kind of environment. But yeah, it's not just the more we get into this digitally driven, self-driven buyer's journey, the more incredibly important it is for you to lean into the reality that people are just doing tons of research before they get to you. And you have a unique opportunity to get in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. But you can't do this without being fully invested in creating world-class educational content and world-class educational events. And there's many teams within your company that need this, not just marketing and sales. So for a data center sustainability marketer to get that leadership buy-in, I think this starts really, really early on in the relationship. The leadership teams that get that sustainability isn't just greenwashing and it isn't marketing BS, are putting their marketing leader in that C-level role. And in many cases, they're integrating that marketing C-level role with the sustainability C-level role. That's how you're getting buy-in. Fixing it after the fact, I don't know. The companies that I see taking world-class leadership in this category when it comes to energy efficiency, power, grid, all of this are natively integrating these two functions together: marketing, communications, events, along with sustainability. So getting the buy-in in many cases is making sure that if you're in a sustainability leadership role or in a marketing leadership role, that you strive to work for a company, that work for a board, work for a leadership team that gets how these need to be joined and very tightly integrated at the hip for you to be able to legitimately talk about what you're really doing, as opposed to just marketing hype and greenwashing the whole thing. And when you do this the right way, it's a beautiful thing. When you approach this as an after the fact, are you really just trying to put lipstick on, So we need to make sure that it's not just about getting buy-in. It's that sustainability has it's not just a regulatory issue. In many cases, there's strong financial implications that can save your company and other community stakeholders a small fortune. There's branding parts of this as well, and it really impacts your go-to-market team. So I think when it comes to it's really about putting this all together. If you think about data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities across the board, everyone needs tighter go-to-market integration than most companies have today. We've been talking about that for quite some time, how marketing works seamlessly with sales and sales works seamlessly with account managers and sales and marketing all work seamlessly together with product, and channel partnerships become an extension of your existing marketing and sales and services and account management type of capabilities. So integration, alignment, getting everyone to trust each other and work well together. Certainly the retreats, certainly the sales kickoffs, the go-to-market kickoffs, whatever you want to call them, certainly have a place. But this is a really, really big cultural issue. And because of that, this needs to start at the top. And for companies that are knocking it out of the park and that are winning these sustainability awards going forward, and there's a lot that want votes to win these sustainability awards across different media and events companies, you're really going to see a tremendous amount of coming together, of bringing together the marketing leadership and the sustainability leadership role across this ecosystem. And in companies where they're large, you're going to see entire organizations that are based on bringing these two functions together cross-functionally and integrating this approach throughout your entire company. Even innovation. I've talked to a number of people that are like chief innovation officers and similar kinds of job functions across companies, both on a consulting basis as well as on the podcast basis. And again, in smaller companies, the product manager, product leader, wears that hat of innovator, chief innovator. In bigger companies, it's a separate role. And some companies, they roll marketing together with product. So there's alignment issues, there's org chart issues that need to be done. But at the end of the day, the company leadership teams that totally get what this is all about and are making big investments to walk the walk and be consistent in behaviors with what they put publicly out there are already making decisions that show just how committed they are. If you're part of a company where you're constantly having to lobby for that, it can be part of what you're doing. But the reality is, if you're spending 40% of your resources and energy playing defense to try to get resources, that's a big loss factor that's preventing you from being more successful in executing what you need to be for your core functions around your goals, your business goals, your key performance indicators, your SMART goals, your objectives and key results, all of that good stuff. So at the end of the day, this is not only just getting leadership buy-in, it's finding, if you're not getting leadership buy-in, finding the leadership team that is bought in to the importance of making sustainability a core part of what you're doing going forward, and recognizing that marketing is a huge, huge part of internally letting that be known, of letting it known among its clients, among its prospects, among its channel partners. And of course, we're seeing increasing interest and increasing need for having communications to community-related stakeholders about sustainability, where you see data center operators and data center developers and other similar parts of the ecosystem spending significant amounts of time building educational resources and educational events that are specifically for non-conventional, non-intuitive kinds of buyer personas, like elected officials, regulators, utility companies, even community activists. There's 3 or 4 segments there that are all intensely, or in many cases intensely, interested in conversations around sustainability at the intersection of data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. But for relatively small companies, you're going to need to pick your battles. You don't want to spread yourself so thin that you're not making an impact anywhere. But at a high level, this is an executive sponsor kind of conversation. This is a board level kind of conversation of deciding what your company really stands for. And if sustainability is a huge part of it, you're going to want to let all of the different stakeholders know early and often, and stay with them throughout their full buyer's journey. So again, convergence of marketing careers, convergence of sustainability careers going forward for a lot of different parts of the data center ecosystem. So that's how a data center That's how a data center sustainability marketer can get leadership buy-in across the board. So that's the final question that we're going to be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm so glad that you're able to join us. If you got good value from this week, make sure to hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic, for a question, for a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter so you can get notified about this on a weekly basis on Sundays in your email inbox. You can subscribe directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I host the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connection invite. Make sure to reference that you watch the show. I'll be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. So thrilled that you were able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We look forward to seeing you back again next week, and enjoy the rest of your week. We wish you great success in data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.